Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to the first episode of Baked in the Cake that we will have video on. And this is our first Zoom meeting that we're having together. And we're usually in person, so this is new for all of us. And not because we care about social distancing, really, but because it's easier. And we get to have Kyle on. As you can see, or hear if you're listening still. We have Kyle Schumacher and DJ Castilleja, and mine says Kelsey Schaefer, but that is my wife's name, and I'm signed into her account. So today I will be Kelsey Schaefer on here. And
I think Kyle was in episode 3 or something.
Yeah, Kyle made a short appearance in an earlier episode, and we talked to the producers, and they said that he had decent ratings and that we could keep him in, if working back in if we want.
Very good.
So today's topic will be Romans 13 and COVID together. And me and DJ already attempted, or we did have this conversation already, and we recorded it, and I accidentally deleted it. So that's my fault, and we're going to have this conversation again, and we'll see how it goes. What we did learn is that it's actually really hard to talk about Romans 13 and COVID together, because there's a lot of unknowns and situational things that, if this happens, then this will happen, if this happens, because it's all new. We've never been in this situation before.
Yeah, a lot of connected issues. And so I think last time we were kind of jumping like subjects, like skip jumping.
Yeah.
So it's real hard to kind of keep a flow of thought going.
Yeah. And
Really disappointed. I was waiting to I kept texting Derek to say, hey, when are you going to release that podcast? And then he told me the sad news.
Yeah, there is one thing that I'm really irritated that I lost about it we had a nice conversation about price gouging. So we're gonna work that in here at some point because I wanna.
That was actually pretty good. So,
yeah, I liked it. But so Kyle,
you changed my mind on it. So
I literally changed his mind and had it in recording.
We gotta get louder here.
I'm very disappointed in myself. But so, okay, I guess where we should start or could start is Romans 13. Does it mean obey the government no matter what? Go.
Well, let me read it. How about that?
You could read it too. Not everyone listening is a Christian, I guess. And if they are, not all Christians really know their Bibles. But
all right, so here it goes. This is the NIV version. It says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from the fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath that bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience." And that's through 5 verses.
okay. So, with no historical context of Paul writing, do you see how, I'm changing my question, do you see how someone can say that means obey the government no matter what? Yes? No?
If it seems like if you did not have any manuscript or printed version of any other portion of the scriptures, You just said, we have these 5 verses, and you came across them, and you looked at these 5 verses. In that light, it is very difficult to look at it any other way other than total obedience.
Well, I think what's interesting about that is you say any of the other scriptures. So we obviously, I don't know anyone here who really agrees with that interpretation of it, but we don't really have this isn't a super academic thing. This is accessible. If you have your Bible, you have other historical manuscripts you can reference in context to understand this scripture better by what Paul means. You don't have to have some super fancy commentary that is on an academic level that's taking you back to the Greek and stuff to understand this. You could even look at the context of Romans 12 and 14 to get a better understanding of it. And I think there's context that's apparent in those 5 verses. When someone, as long as you're understanding too, if you're using some hermeneutics, that this is not written to us specifically. This was written to Romans, the church in Rome. So he's writing to them because the people there want to rebel. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I right? We all good?
Well, I just want to say your question was just listening to that one passage. Is that what it means if you didn't take anything else?
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that no one here really thinks that's what it means. I was saying it's easy if you just take it out of context by itself, then you could say that. But I think even take those 5 verses by themselves, I think there's evidence that's not very hard to find that he's talking about something a little more specific than just submitting to the government no matter what.
Right. So my understanding of the context comes mainly off Romans 12. And so Romans 13 is evidence of our Christian love, that as part of our Christian love, we're going to be one, we're going to be united. We see that in Romans 12, it says one, we're going to be one. Over and over again, it says one. Then it talks about love. And then, and so as evidence, we're going to be good subjects to the governing authorities in Romans 13.
Yes. And I think that
I hear you in that many people, or I've heard it many times, the baked in the cake idea, where you forget the context and you apply this, and in a lot of cases for us in the United States. This is about us in the United States.
What?
Hi there.
I think that it's interesting how this is. I think I'm about to jab some people maybe that are listening. I don't know. It's the Western American Christians that hear Romans 13 and agree with it because they think the government is on their side and agrees with them. They weren't living under a rebellious government. I'm like, all right, well, how do we apply this even when living under a rebellious government? Because they were, whenever it was written, they were under persecution. So I'd even say take it, I'm an anarchist, but I'm going to say take it farther. Like the government Paul is writing to this, telling them not to rebel while they were under persecution. So I think that's also to be something said about that. But I don't think he's saying submit no matter what, because of other biblical context. I think we should be ready to take persecution. And if the government wants to do that to us, then God is glorified in our persecution, I would say.
Well, and I mean, was the first, when it comes to be subjected to the government, a lot of times people will take it to just war theory and Augustine. And I'm wondering, and so it was what Constantine converted the, Holy Roman Empire, right? And then Augustine. If I get my ancient history is not so great. And then Augustine was born into what was essentially the whole Holy Roman Empire, right? It had already been Christianized.
480, I think, around.
Because so he's maybe one of the first people that we have thinking about this when there's not an adverse government.
I could see, yeah.
And he struggled with it because he was probably wondering when the government would do things that were abhorrent to, God's law, natural law, that he'd go, oh, I don't want to be subject to this. And so I think that would be one of the first times that, but I'm not well versed in ancient historical writings. So,
well, I think that you don't have to be well versed in ancient historical writings to get better context. Because, like I said earlier, you just need scripture. You have historical writings, but that are accessible to you, that aren't intimidating either, or that intimidating. I guess if you've never read scripture, it is intimidating. But I think the book of Acts is a very solid portion where you can kind of apply a lot, since it's Paul's in the book of Acts. And you start seeing persecution. Acts 5:29 is really specific. You could say that it's not applying to the government, but just like the Jewish type of overseers and governments. But Acts 29 says to obey God rather than men. It doesn't say to obey God rather than the people you just don't like, or the people you do like, or it's rather than men. The government, whoever it is, men. That God comes first, and if that means to disobey government, that's what that means, and you see that happening too.
But we see that in Daniel.
Well, yeah, obviously in Daniel. But you can even, Acts 16 is another example that I point to a lot, where Paul was asked, well, he was wrongly beaten and jailed, and then he was asked to leave quietly. The government didn't want to be embarrassed. They're like, oh, you're a Roman citizen? Please leave quietly. Paul didn't have to cause a fuss when he left, but he chose to make a mockery of them, as because they were unjust. They were not carrying the sword as for good. They were not being the type of government, you could say, that God had established. Their people were using their power for wrong, and that's just in the New Testament, and that's 2 books in the New Testament.
Okay, so I think where we're trying to go with this is with the COVID-19 coronavirus spreading across the world. We have some churches that we have the government saying, for churches not to meet, and churches are wanting to meet. And so I think that's kind of where this comes into play a little bit, where in the Bible, we're told to continue to meet in the book of Acts, meet regularly, and yet we have these mandates from the government to not meet. What are the lines there?
I think that it really should just be up to the church. I really do. My instinct, this is what I told our pastor when he asked me what I think we should do. I said I have 2 opinions. I have my personal opinion and my opinion what I think the church should do. My personal opinion is I think we should meet, even if they tell us not to. I think we should come in. And anyone who doesn't want to take that risk doesn't have to come to church. We're not forcing anyone to come. This is all voluntary. They do not have to be here. And we should discourage those who are at risk from going too. But I don't think the for the government to tell us to not, I feel like we should take the persecution if they were to come arrest us. I feel like it's super weird to me that we had an Easter service and didn't meet. That was really, I feel like that looks really bad. But I'm not the authority of our entire church, and I'm not the only opinion that needs to be held high or heard. So we went to the deacons and asked the deacons what to do. And in our church, if you're familiar with other church governments, our deacons act as elders, even though we call them deacons. And they thought we should, 6 out of 8 voted that we should cancel services even a week before we had to. And I thought that was strange. I really didn't like that. I really didn't. But it's not all about me. It's what we, it's about bearing in love with one another. So I put up with it because I love the church. I don't raise a fuss over ridiculous things.
Well, I think we're agreeing to be subject to the church's authority.
Yeah.
And the vote to say, no, we have technology, so we can put it online. So we can actually technically still have the service. So the vote to do that is different than if it were, 30 years ago and you didn't have that technology.
I hadn't thought of that.
And so in a sense, there's that. And then secondly, so they weren't choosing something to be particularly sinful. They weren't, saying, hey, it's the communists, it's the Maoists, it's the whomever, rat out your neighbor, like some churches did in the 20th century.
Yeah.
They're going, is this virus? We don't exactly, maybe, I don't know what the discussion was, but there was a vote and they just said, we're going to choose to do X. And then on your side, you were like, yeah, I'm going to follow that because I'm subject to I put myself subject to their authority, which is all Romans 13 is about. You're going to subject yourself to the proper authority at the proper time.
Yeah.
And then I also think that when it comes to Paul, he doesn't go into what government actually is, which is what theorists have done in the 2,000 years since he wrote. And so that makes a big difference because we are under a constitutional republic. And so being under a constitutional republic, we have a constitution that literally has an inalienable right that says Congress shall make no.
Uh-oh.
See you, Kyle.
We're censoring him.
Yeah.
Against.
Oh, there he is.
Everything just went black on my screen. Okay. Everything just went black. So
we didn't like yours.
Anyway. Man, I forgot where I was going with that. So we have the right to assemble. So we have the right to assemble and we have the right to free religion. All right. And so those are inalienable, meaning the right was not given to us by the Constitution. That right actually existed, and it's God-given or natural, or if you don't believe in that, right, because natural law is God-given law in effect. If you don't believe in that, the idea was this just exists by the sheer fact that you're a human.
Well, you're talking about something we hadn't really talked about yet, or, an aspect of it we hadn't talked about yet, is that, okay, this is how we should behave in government for this scenario, this scenario, this scenario, but does our government even have the right to do what they're doing to us is really another question. And I think by our Constitution, they don't. And any government, when people say we live in the land of the free, any government that can literally lock you down on house arrest because we're scared of a disease it's not the bubonic plague here, that's not a free country. That's a tyrannical country. That's what that is. I don't understand how people would say that this is a huge, great democracy, is what you'll hear.
Well, that democracy I don't think it's biblical, and it's also terrible. I mean,
it's mob rule.
Can be, democracy can be just as tyrannical as a king, and often is worse because normally they feel like a democracy, if you get 51% of the vote, feels like it's just in doing what it's doing. And I heard Judge Napolitano say once, he goes, at least a king knows that it's not necessarily just what he's doing. He might know that he's a tyrant, right? Whereas if you get 51% of people, there, a lot of them are going to be like, yeah, what we're doing is just and right, which is unique. But since Woodrow Wilson and us making the world safe for democracy, we use democracy way more than we do republic, which in relation to our federal government is completely inaccurate.
Yeah.
So I was looking for an article here, and from a new, I wouldn't say this is reputable news source, but it's a common news source, NBC News. And it's about, the headline is Florida pastor arrested after holding church services despite coronavirus orders. And there is a pastor in Florida who's accused of ignoring local orders against mass gatherings due to the coronavirus pandemic and showing reckless disregard for human life, authorities said. The River at Tampa Bay Church held services over the weekend, and this was back in March 30th when this article was written. The sheriff said he had no choice but to take action against the pastor, Rodney Howard Brown. And so, there's a pastor being arrested for gathering his church.
Well, if you look at the, because I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but if you look at that facts behind it too, the pastor was working not directly with the community authorities or the local magistrates, as you might say, but he was trying to get an idea of, okay, what are you assessing here, so that we can comply with the rules, be apart by 6 feet and be separated in that way. They did a bunch of renovations to their facility to actually comply with every single aspect of what that order was. And so it actually seems like a takedown for sure by Tampa Bay's authorities, rather than him being belligerent and not even trying to figure out a way to to be subject to whatever authority he is required to give to the Tampa Bay authorities.
So, Kyle, I have a question for you. Since, like what you said, the government now, you're going to have to dream a little bit that the government is actually abiding by the Constitution. So they seem to be delegating a lot of this responsibility and enforcement to the states. So is it now to the state's Constitution that we are going to have to look at if we are, going to fight something in court for anything like that scenario?
Yeah, okay. So go ahead, DJ.
Well, you're the lawyer, so I was going to let you speak up.
Okay. There's a lot to be said for that. And so we have the Bill of Rights, which is what we mentioned earlier. Do the Bill of Rights, which are in the Constitution, apply to the states originally? Did they originally apply to the states is the question. Because the Constitution regulates how the federal, what powers the federal government has, and then it regulates or takes away some of the power that the states in their sovereignty were giving up, right? So it does regulate both. And then what happened is after the 14th Amendment was written, basically almost every single Bill of Rights was incorporated to apply to all the states, subsequently through different case law. So now, the way that the Supreme Court basically rules on it is that the Bill of Rights is going to be applicable to the states. But you also got to remember that a lot of the states wrote their constitutions in the same way that the federal one was written, in the sense that they're still trying to write rights into their constitution to protect the people from the government, knowing that there's going to be tyranny there, right? So in Virginia, Thomas Jefferson wanted the separation of church and state, and that has its whole other context of what that means and what it has become to mean now, but that made it different. Basically, what he was saying is, I don't want you to have to swear allegiance to the Episcopalians if you're a Baptist. That was the whole thing. They didn't want those types of votes. Okay, that's the first part. Point two is that when the Supreme Court is making decisions about whether the government can or cannot do something, they take into account whether it's constitutional. And so there's the different types of scrutinies, where there's strict scrutiny, and oh shoot, I can't remember what they're called right now. Moderate scrutiny. This is terrible. People
what kind of lawyer are you?
What?
What kind of lawyer are you?
Medium scrutiny, and then like basically, do they have at least a tentative, plausible reason for why they're making this rule? So this, because it's one of the Bill of Rights, it's strict scrutiny. So they will have to say specifically why this rule that they're making, they can make this law and prevent you from meeting. But more specifically, if you think about like the right to free speech, well, you can't go even on, with the government, you still have to get a permit to go and do a parade, whatever your parade's going to be, whatever. I wish people used more spoons. You have to get this permit to do it, and they go, yes, that suffices with strict scrutiny, because they're not saying it's the content that we're trying to stop. It's not the content that they're trying to stop. What they're trying to stop is any sort of mass craziness that happens because they didn't get a permit to make sure that the streets are going to be blocked off, that they have the proper amount of police, that it's there. So if you buy into it, it's possible that the Supreme Court and the leftist judges would probably go, whoa, this was not related to the content. It was related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And because it was related to that, they had a governmental purpose for taking away that right. Now, on the other side, you would argue that no, this was very much viewpoint based and not safety based, because there's liquor stores are open, and abortion clinics are open, and pot stores are open, and so you just don't disagree with those viewpoints. And pot stores meaning recreational ones, not just I guess if those are medical that people need, then you would want people to have access to the medicine that they need to have access to. But these recreational things are open, right? So that's the analysis. And we'll find out, because I'm pretty sure this guy is probably going to bring this before, the state court, and it'll probably eventually make its way up to the Supreme Court.
That's what I was going at. I was like, it sounds like this could be a Supreme Court case.
Now, let me tell you another one. And what the Supreme Court does is they'll take, well, this case happened here, and this case happened here, and this case happened here, and they'll combine them and say, we're going to kind of make the principle for this. Because in Idaho, I think it was in Idaho, there was a church service that had a drive-in service. And they came and issued $500 citations to every single person, not just vehicle, but person that was there. They all had their windows up, right? They're all listening on the transmitter through their radio like a drive-in, and they got a citation for that. That's going to be very difficult to prove. And then I heard that what they did later on is they went to the local Walmart and showed the parking lot there. They went to and went in the stores and were videotaping to reflect, okay, it's pretty much biased. You're not doing the same thing here, and we're actually being more socially distanced because we're not getting out of our cars. So.
Wow.
So is there ever, here, DJ, I'm going to ask you this, is there ever, now that we just referenced some crazy things going on to the government, since we're governed by the Constitution, do you think there's any just cause for us to rebel or civil disobedience at least?
I don't know about it. It depends on what you mean by rebel.
Well, I think you could, by the smallest part, just civil disobedience. Say, I'm not going to wear a mask or something to that effect.
Well, I wouldn't say, and I wouldn't use that context, but say that there is a time when the church is mandated by the government not to meet. Maybe even because it's the church, then I think that's kind of when where the civil disobedience would be not an outward protest or anything, but the church just meets without anybody knowing.
Yeah. What I think is,
Sorry.
what'd you say?
Secret.
Like
Secret
an underground church.
Something.
You broke up. What'd you say?
Secret church. Secret church. Isn't that a thing that we're doing?
Yeah.
Right now, this weekend. Is it Friday?
Yeah, I need to send out the stuff for that, but it's
No,
it
but
is.
that's exactly right. That's the concept behind why David Platt started Secret Church. Was he was on a mission trip, and there was a church meeting secret because of persecution. And it wasn't like they were out there taking up arms against the government so that they could meet, but they did continue meeting without trying to cause a big disturbance.
So I got another one for you. Let's take this a little further. I've been reading and listening to a lot of discussion about this. I grew up hearing that it was wrong to lie to authorities, to the government, ever, because it is lying, and lying is wrong. So if they came and asked you if you were having a church meeting and you had 10 people in your house and they were cracking down, would it be wrong to say, no, we're just having a birthday party? Or to, just lie to get out of it?
I would say I'm meeting with friends.
Well, they're going to press a little harder than that. I'm not sure if that's going to hold up.
Well, I think that at least the Old Testament is full of examples where they lie to the government officials.
Yeah, I would lie. I don't have a problem lying.
See, the way I see it is, you just like when someone assaults you, that's what makes your retaliation just. But if you had hit them first, you are the aggressor. So your retaliation is lying, and it makes it okay.
I think there's some lines, like if it's persecuting and you're going to get beaten, like my friends are going to get beaten, yeah, I would lie. If it's the same way like with the right to protect your family. Is it necessarily right to kill someone? No, but I'm going to protect my family. I don't know if that's being a bad Christian or not. But now put the line, if they ask you, are you a Christian? Do you follow Jesus? And if you say yes, I'm going to kill you. Do you lie?
Well,
I think.
So what if? Let's look at a biblical example. I might pick on you, Kyle. Okay. You're also gonna have to correct me because it's just coming up off the top of my head. Isaac's wife was Rebecca, right? Okay. So, but is it not? Was it Isaac never went to Egypt? Okay. When
Sarah.
Abraham went to Egypt, right, and he had to lie, and he said it was his sister, Sarah, right? So, God rebukes him of that, right?
Well, he did it twice, but he thought that Pharaoh would just kill him if he didn't do it. I'm not saying that that's right, but that's what he thought would happen. And we know that kings clearly do that because obviously that's something that David did.
Yeah.
But then again, by not telling him, and the king actually, God having some sort of control in that, cursed the king's house or Pharaoh's house, right? Curse is probably the wrong word, but trying to think of what word that happened. But bad things started happening to his house. He's like, why is this happening? And it became aware that she was the husband or the wife of another man. So he's like, why didn't you tell me this? You brought pain to my household. Not good. Get out of here. So yeah, it's not always good to lie. It's often not good to lie, but it's one of those things where it is true, in my opinion, that when government officials are asking questions, it's in order to persecute or prosecute, and not necessarily because they're informally getting information.
Oh yeah,
right?
they're trying to self-incriminate.
That whoever they're asking, that person did wrong. So when a police officer asks, and this could be the sweet, most kind-hearted police officer in the world, when they ask a question, they can use it against you. There's a whole reason why we have that right. Is whatever your answer is, and you're trying to explain and say all these different things. Nope, you either say nothing, you just say nothing at that point, because their point is not to prove you innocent. Their point is to try and make sure that you are guilty.
I like to tell people that not just anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, but any power you give the government can and will be used against you eventually whenever we start arguing about how we can steal from each other to support our own causes, you know. So yeah, no, police officers are typically, they're typically just trying to get you to self-incriminate so they can make some money. And a lot of times they only even pay for their own salaries. They're not even making the state that much money.
You see, I have a better, I'm a glass half full type of thing. I give the benefit of the doubt to the police.
Well, a lot of them aren't doing it. A lot don't realize that that's what they're doing, and they've been propagandaed into believing they're doing other things too. But you'd be surprised how many of them know what they're doing is wrong. And they just say, change. Oh, that's the law. That's the law. I'm like, is the law your moral authority? If you're a Christian, it sure shouldn't be. It's a really low standard.
Now, let me flip it around. I have a friend who is in federal law enforcement. And he's like, look, if you try and force me to enforce an unconstitutional law, I'm not going to do it. And that's what he's telling me. I'm not going to do that. And so flipping it around, because we always think like what happens when the police officer is coming to us. But if you're going to flip it around, and you have a police officer who is a Christian, and they're going to try and apply these different principles that we're talking about in that scenario, or you see somebody who's not wearing a mask, you see somebody who's at a public park not doing the proper social distancing, how are they going to respond to what's required of them? And he's like, well, I definitely want to impose something that's unconstitutional. And so if you're flipping it around,
I think most of them would say that in conversation and then go enforce it like crazy.
Oh man, that'd be interesting. It's interesting. It sounds like, and this is obviously not studious at all, and there's no stats. It's just him talking to some of his buddies. He's got some friends that are just in local law enforcement in different areas, and they're like, yeah, nobody's going around. He's like, the few people that are writing tickets are ridiculous. It's kind of crazy that that's happening. Like people getting pulled out of the ocean for, windsurfing or whatever. And they're like, yeah, we're just not enforcing it. Now, a lot of people are also complying with the requests. And that actually, that gets back to the original question is, you're right that the federal government, like Trump did not do a shutdown because he doesn't have the constitutional power to do a shutdown. But what he did that was terrible and egregious and totally unconstitutional was print about $6 trillion and steal money from everybody. Now, that wasn't just that was the Democrats. That was the Republicans. That was the Federal Reserve, like the IRS, all working in conjunction. Like,
I'm fine with it.
You're fine with it?
Yeah, I don't mind the extra money.
Well, I hope you don't have any money in savings then.
Yeah, but I don't think you are actually fine with them violating the Constitution.
No, I'm fine with the money in my bank account.
Yeah. Okay. So because it benefited you, you're fine with a violation of the Constitution.
We only don't like laws that don't benefit us, and that's the way I'm going to view everything.
So are you going to give the money back?
Well, it was already stolen from me to begin with.
Okay, that's my excuse then.
I agree. I was going to say, your point of view could be, I'm a net taxpayer, And so therefore, this is only money that they're giving back to me. And giving is this way, is in quotes, in my opinion.
I think the typical conservative, not libertarian stance is going to be like, oh, this is welfare money and this and this and this, and it's wrong to take it. And we need to balance our budget. Because that's what I've heard from a few people. It's kind of the same complaints that you heard from the bailouts in 2008 and things like that. But where I don't care is that there is absolutely nothing I can do to get Congress to balance their budget. It's clear that they're going to run it into the ground. I'd rather than run it into the ground and me have an extra $1,200 than I don't care about the balancing the budget. They're wrecking the government, not me. That's the way I see it.
Okay, so let me pose this. If the government is gonna they're gonna build a road through your property, so they're gonna take your property and then justly pay you for it, which they have the right to do. Okay, would you accept that money?
Oh, well, you're talking about eminent domain now.
Hear me out. If the government, if you own property outright, let's say, and we're going to build a road through this, and let's say you own a house that's $200,000, whatever, you own it outright, so there's that, and they're going to we're going to build a road, and so they use eminent domain. You go through all the court systems, and the courts, whether they agree or you bring it all the way up, it's finally fought to say they have the right to put that road through your house, and so now you have to sell the house. If they paid you money for that house, would you take it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So the analogy is, if you were forced to not be able to work, or your employment was severely hampered because of the shutdown, right? Mine, I can do a lot of it remotely, but I haven't been able to meet with new clients recently because they're all locked in, and it's more difficult to do it, and they need to provide documents. Not all of them have scanners, not all, all this stuff, whatever. But others, obviously restaurants have been completely shut down. So they lost their property right in their ability to be either employed or to employ and be entrepreneurs. And so now this is a measly amount for what they're getting paid. It's a measly amount, but that's kind of what it is. It's not just because $1,200 is, that's not, people are losing a lot more money than that.
Well, that's what that even in your first, analogy of me, of them building a road, would I take the money? Yes, because they've probably prevented me from selling it to anyone else, and they're not going to give me a fair market price on it either. If it's a $200,000 house, I bet the government's going to come in at $120,000.
Well, I'd have to look at, eminent domain laws are different, but constitutionally they would be required to give you a just payment for it.
Well, they're going to call it a just payment, but I don't think it's a just payment because something's worth what someone's willing to pay.
This is where the bureaucracy comes in, and they say, well, did you go through the steps? Did you have an appraiser come in, and did you have these things set up? So that way, if you do those things, then they can say we came up with a reasonable market value of what you could sell it on the open market otherwise.
I would go on.
I was going
to say take my last tax accession, because if it was recent, because whenever they're doing property taxes, they always want my house to be worth a lot of money, but whenever they're buying my house back from me, they don't want it to be worth very much.
Well, if I were to write one law that would help correct their unequal appraisals, it would just be this. It would simply be, whatever you appraise a house for, you have to be willing to pay immediately the price for that house, right? Yeah. Just go, my house is worth $200,000, but they have an incentive based off of taxation to say that my house is worth $300,000. And I would say, sold, I'm selling my house, you buy it from me. And then I would pocket my profit because they're, it would de-incentivize them from being selfish.
Yeah.
So knowing that with that, going back to Romans 13, we talk sometimes about this question about rebelling against government, but we also see in Romans 13 that God puts them in place.
Okay, so the way I handle this, at least, is that God puts everything in place. Of course, He puts the government in place. God is so sovereign that He is holding the dust particles in the air in the room that I'm in, and He knows where they're at. It'd be ridiculous to say that the government wasn't put in place by God. But where people get into some logical issues here is, well, say there's a rebellion going, and now there's a new government, and were they put there by God by rebelling? Because rebelling is obvious. I mean, Romans 13 says to not rebel. What if it's a Christian rebellion? What if they're establishing a Christian nation like the United States of America? And
that assumptions there.
Yeah, so what if it's a Christian rebellion and it's gotta be a little more nuanced, I think. I don't agree with the Revolutionary War, but I think it's a little nuanced.
I've stated time and time again that I really find myself that I'm apolitical. Like I really, it doesn't matter to really politics and who's in government, what kind of government we have, it really doesn't matter a whole lot to me. I have the discussions, but I think when I bring this theologically, the government can do what they want. What matters is the kingdom of God and God's glory here on earth. And so I'm not trying to undermine the conversation here, but maybe that's part of the idea here in Romans 13 is whether God places whoever's in there, Trump or Pelosi, whoever, God can use it.
Well, think of it like this, maybe that
does the government, is it able to do whatever it wants morally?
I don't know. Is the government able to do whatever it wants morally?
Correct. Because the government does it, it is now moral. That's not what you're saying.
That. No.
Okay. So
no. Yeah, I'm not saying they're doing God's work.
If the government's going to murder 1 million people or allow others to murder people, if it does it, it does it. I don't think you really mean that. But I do think that you're saying what's the most important is the gospel, right? So Paul's saying, look, pay your taxes because, the taxes are related to earthly things. The gospel is the most important thing. Now, a lot of people use when Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. Well, I'll tell you one thing, everything's God's and nothing's Caesar's. So a lot of people will use that to go, see, you should give to Caesar what it, and I'd say, fine, I'll give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Zero, it's all God's. But then Paul is reminding to say, no, just pay your taxes. Don't go to jail for not paying taxes. Go to jail for preaching the gospel, for meeting and being Christians together. Go to jail for that.
Well, let me defend DJ's initial stance a little bit.
I think I agree with him. I don't think I was.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah. Certainly, if the government's going around killing people, there's more to it.
So let's say the government's going around killing people, but you don't have a dog in the fight when it comes to the government. Then you have no problem calling out that injustice. Whenever we start getting politically motivated, we start siding with the people that are killing those millions of, you know what I mean? So if you, let's say, war is always bipartisan. Let's say it wasn't bipartisan, and the Iraq war, we invade Iraq and kill 1.5 million people, including citizens, and it was only a Republican thing. And because my loyalty is to the Republican Party, I'm going to be inclined to defend that, and I'm going to make excuses for this and that. But whenever you don't have a loyalty to a political party, your loyalty is to God and the gospel, and He is your moral authority, you don't have a problem going and saying, that's not on my hands. My kingdom's not of this world. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, I think some people do that. But I think that people less look at the wars, at least that America has been in, and say, well, that's, I don't think they'd say it that way. I think they'd say God is using us, and it was just a fight because those people were evil, and an even worse thing was going to happen.
I think that's baked in the cake idea.
Oh, it's very baked in the cake. And Kyle, you're right. That's what they'd say. But yeah,
some way we justify the war, so that I guess we can feel better about it as Christians.
Yeah.
If you and there's Christians who agree with what the government is doing with the shutdown, who cheer it on and say, do this, comply. It is to me, it's the exact same lie that gets people to do a shutdown like this as it is to get people to go to war. And so it's hard for people to see, although I'm taking a different position on war or on the virus, you are actually taking the same position on the underlying value of what you believe the government can do and why it should do it.
So what led me to my anarcho-capitalism all really started with idolatry. Is that I feel that God convicted me of idolatry. And I think all sin is ultimately idolatry. All sin is really just me saying, I don't want to worship God. I want to be God instead. Are you there, Kyle? Okay, I'm going to continue with you, DJ.
Probably take a break.
Yeah, he's going to take a break. But so I was, okay, you there?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So all sin is really idolatry, is what I was saying. And it's saying that I don't want to worship God. I want to be God. That's what that is. And we often forget who God is when we choose to sin. But so whenever I see a section of scripture like 1 Samuel chapter 8, and it appears that God would rather his people continue in the cycle of Judges, which is a very, very, very bloody time, and some pretty crazy things happen in the book of Judges. He'd rather that continue than them put their faith in someone else other than him as idolaters. Then I take that very seriously.
An interesting thing about that is at a meeting, I think all three of us were at once, and I just said, well, yes, they go, taxation is fine as long as it's not, too aggressive. Well, how do you define what's too aggressive? And then they brought up, well, it's 10% in Samuel 8, so that's not too much. Now, in Samuel 8, it's not a good thing what he's doing. And then I was thinking about the fact that when God was like, no, like, I want to be the ruler and there's going to be these judges, what taxes were paid? Like, if people went to fight, they, I guess, brought their own stuff and went to fight. And so I thought that was an interesting point, that people will flip an argument and go, oh, well, look to 1 Samuel 8, and you're like, no, I don't want somebody to just take my daughter to be their bride without my permission, without her permission. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So people will use that, and I'm like, well, you're flipping it around and thinking that maybe that king will act justly, and we all know, because people are born sinful. So,
but the meeting reference that I like, and I wasn't at the meeting, I heard it afterward, was about since we're talking about rebelling against the government, I mean, that's how the U.S. was started. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
No, you're exactly. There was a declaration. Can't remember what it's exactly called, uh, where they're like, "Hey, King George, we're out of here."
Right. So the government is, even though, I guess some consider a Christian or, God-led nation, it started on rebellion. The American Revolution was rebellion against the government.
And it was rebellion against the government that was the freest nation at the time. There was possibly no other government who offered as many liberties as the British Empire.
And it's celebrated.
Well, so this is the way I see people putting their faith in government, or the way I look at the Old Testament. God allows them to have their king, and he tells Samuel, urge them not to, but give it to them. And the Old Testament is showing the total depravity of man and our tendency to put our faith in things like government over God. And now that we have the kingdom of God, it's here now and yet to come. Jesus has inaugurated the kingdom. When he comes back, it'll be consummated. That's the kingdom that we're focusing on now, and not world governments. And the Old Testament shows how it ends up when we put our faith in world governments. Even Israel was falling into child sacrifice and horrible sins. And if we put our faith in governments, we find ourselves falling into horrifying sins like that and supporting horrible wars that kill a bunch of people that we don't care about for some reason. We've been bombing the crap out of the poorest nations for 20 years. Carpet bombing them and celebrating it. That's immoral. What do we...
Well, and it's governments that that make it possible for some of the largest and most egregious types of atrocities, whether enslavement or death, right? So there's the Fugitive Slave Act, which required states to return slaves to other states. That was a federal law that required that, right? Not only does the government give money, so people will often go, well, Kyle, if you're an anarcho-capitalist, then you think there should be no law against abortion. You should think that should be allowed. Now, the way that I take it is the first law that I would repeal if I was going to become an anarcho, if I was going to start my Ancapistan, would be to repeal murder. No, that might be the last one that I said the government has control over, right? As far as saying, okay, no, murder is no longer illegal, which abortion would be, murder is illegal. But if you take away the government, which provides this warfare state, and provides people the ability to not have the requirement of independence and taking responsibility, then they're going to make more responsible decisions, right? If it's not going to be convenient to put yourself in a situation to get pregnant, then people will actually take those steps. And so I think in Ancapistan, there would be far fewer abortions because people would have to be way more conservative about how they act because there's not some safety net ready to bail them out. But the government just makes things more possible on a magnitude.
So as we're winding down here, I don't think we're going to get to my price gouging, but hopefully we'll be able to do this more regularly now that we have this Zoom meeting. And if DJ can't come, me and just Kyle can do it. And if Kyle can't come, we'll just me and DJ again. And maybe we'll get some other guests on here now that we can just have anyone pop in. That'll be fun.
How much time do we got left?
We have 5 minutes.
Okay, because I know you're wrapping up, but I'm a avid listener of the Baked in the Cake podcast, and I was listening to what happened to be, I think, an atrocious opinion about Star Wars.
Okay,
we'll have to say that.
We're going to have an entire another episode where you can come back and rebut me and DJ on Star Wars.
I don't think a DJ agreed with your terrible opinion.
I thought me and DJ ended on great terms.
I think that he did a good job of listening and clarifying.
DJ's a good counterpart to me. He's not near as obnoxious.
I don't the whole episode. Frankly, I just think that I could say this right now. You are using both the Empire and the First Order. You're going to use those two as the example. And my point is, the Empire blew up one whole entire planet with presumably, let's just say 7 billion people, because
allegedly.
That's how many are. Oh, no, the documentary clearly states that that's what they did. Like, and then the First Order, it blew up 5 planets. Let's also assume 7 billion. All I'm saying is the mass murder that is there.
If you just ignore those instances, all you have to do is ignore those instances, and it changes everything.
It's very, very, very hard to ignore. That's all. That's
just
all I'm saying.
It didn't happen. You have to. You also have to ignore that Anakin killed a bunch of little kids.
Yes, it's very bad.
Look at what Obi-Wan did to Anakin.
Well, he was on the high ground, and Anakin attacked him.
Okay.
I would like to agree.
He could have ended it right there.
Oh.
He would have finished them off.
Well, I still think that the Emperor was in power at that time.
True. It wouldn't. Palpatine would have kept that going.
Yeah, kept that going. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'm just saying, 6 planets, or I think it was 6 planets in total. That's hard to overcome.
Do you watch any of the cartoon series, the Clone Wars?
I have portions of them, not all of them.
The latest episode, season 7, kind of deals with some of the issues that common people were having with the Jedi.
Ah, interesting. See, there you go. I'm interested in that.
Okay, so we're going to bring that on and talk about that another time, possibly next week. As long as Kyle has a real job and DJ has a real job, I don't have a real job. I can do this however much y'all want.
Well, it's easier now that I'm at home all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So that is all that we have time for today in Baked in the Cake. Please give us a great review, subscribe, because we're on YouTube now. And, I get to say, they always say smash that like button, and they're trying to, get that a little bit different, but I hadn't heard this one yet, and if I wanted to say it. If you can squish that like button, that would be great for us on YouTube. All right.
And if you have comments, please put your comments, feedback in there. Be nice. Maybe we'll read some questions on the podcast if we get some.
Yeah. All right. So thank you very much, and see you later.
Bye.